Okay, here we go. So for day 4 of 100. um, yeah, so this evening I'm kind of depleted. I've had a very full day, and showing up to do this is actually a little challenging. Like it's uh, like to have myself show up and follow through in what I intended to do in a way that respects where I'm at. Uh, so the thing that it feels like I can speak to right now, um, like part of the reason I'm a little drained right now is I've spent much of the day having conversations with people, helping them to find places where, how to say this succinctly, um, noticing the places in their lives where there's, for lack of a better term, a sort of frequency that they can tune into that will sort of unlock a bunch of their own resources, their own capacity to show up to do the things that they want to do with their lives to be really fulfilled. Um, and like, what are the conditions under which I can help people do that? I don't actually know. Um, this touches on an area that I've been playing with an awful lot. There's like a couple of days ago, I mentioned this bit about energy and like in the sense that often gets talked about in woo contexts. Um, but there's something that I suspect that this is what a lot of people mean, even in woo contexts. That there's actually a direct experience. There's something that's here about the lived experience of how attention consciousness moves in the interaction with the world, like the way that anger feels like something that moves through me, um, and like other emotions, sadness has a kind of sinking feeling. Well, what's sinking? Well, I don't know about there being a substance that sinks, or that when anger rises, that there's a substance that rises, but it sure feels like something moves. And so, whatever that experience is, calling that a kind of energy seems fine. It's just a little confusing with respect to physics. But it does move things. It is a capacity to create change, it is a capacity to apply a kind of force. So, I've I've been experiencing. There's a lot of self-consciousness here. This is really curious. It's fun. It's fascinating to watch, even in my own lived experience, how even from day to day I can have these shifts in what kind of energy I can hold. And in that case, when I say energy, I mean the thing that I was referring to as a frequency. I have an experience like almost like the body is a radio, and that it's possible to tune into a whole bunch of different stations. So when I'm listening to music, this is really obvious. Uh, when I'm listening to some like rock or metal, there's like a like there's this way that my body wants to move, but it's not just about the movement. There's a sensation, much like the emotions, where that kind of music feels so different from jazz, which has this like this almost playful trickstery but very fluid nature to it. Or Irish music, there's a very bouncy characteristic to it. And and yeah, those give rise to kinds of movement. It's going to be a little strange to dance a waltz to Irish music. Like you can, but it would be a quick waltz. There would be a lot of energy to it. It would be a little strange to do an Argentine tango to Moonlight Sonata. Like it wouldn't be too. Actually, that one would match just fine. Having trouble finding things that don't resonate. My mind is a little worn out right now, and I'm not able to find things that are hard to think about. Um, Man, there's the self-consciousness again. It is so curious to experience this. It feels sort of like there's these hiccups that are happening in my system, and I'm used to sorting them out with energy. And now that I have lower energy, just for right now, there's like a lot of these egoic, oh, am I looking good? Am I presenting well? That sort of is running a little more. And it sort of gives me some snapshot of how much has been suppressed rather than dismantled in the course of applying attention when there's more energy. So it's fascinating to notice. So in the style that all these different kinds of music can feel and move differently. Like if I'm just still and I listen to music, it affects my heart. By that I mean like literally some kind of area in my chest, but I mean it energetically. I mean it subtly. And it affects more of my body as well. Like I can get tingles from listening to certain kinds of music. I get ASMR. I don't think I just mean ASMR, but maybe secretly I do. Um, so my impression is something like everything is music. This is an intuition that it feels vividly clear to me on a body level, on a somatic level. It's very clear. Uh, I notice I have a little bit of difficulty expressing clearly what I mean intellectually. But there's something about when I walk into a room, I feel the aesthetics of the room. It's like it's a particular frequency. And when I say frequency, I mean the same thing as like the way that different genres of music have their own frequency. That's like more like a bandwidth. Like there's a bandwidth, and within that bandwidth, there's a bunch of different frequencies. But my body is tuning to these experiences. Like I walk into a room and I feel the aesthetic of the room. And of course, I'll come with some preference. Do I like it? Do I dislike it? Is it complex? How do I relate to this frequency of this room? On one of the part of the reason that's so important is that I think everything is a frequency. In terms of the lived experience of the body, I have a hard time finding anything. What's a hard time finding is not the word I need to say. What I actually mean to say is that everything that happens at a mechanical level follows from frequency. So, like earlier, I was cooking a bit of sausage meat, some ground sausage meat, and this is in a kind of in a very tiny kitchen using a movable induction stove. So, so the area that I have to cook in is very tiny. And part of the reason that's important is when cooking sausage, it's very easy to create splatters with the oil. So I used a lid in order to cover that up. But then I had to flip the burger over, flip the patty over to cook the other side. And in the course of flipping it over, there was this big splatter, and I tried to cover it up with the lid, but it just like, ah. I mean, so there's, I kind of knew this would be an issue. um, and there was something about the amount of work that it was going to take to clean up the grease splatter I was aware of. But I wasn't paying attention to it. Because if I were paying attention to it, I wouldn't have tried to pick it up with a spatula and then flop it into the pile of grease. It doesn't take that much awareness to notice that's not going to do good things. And then just trying to be tense and ready with the lid doesn't solve the problem. And that it might be better served if I also got a fork or something and then eased them together, sort of like getting two sides of the patty and then putting it down more carefully. This would have been very straightforward to do. It didn't take very much thought for me to realize that that would be a good idea. It kind of flashed through my mind after the splatter happened. But even though I was trying to anticipate the splatter and deal with it, I couldn't think of that beforehand. Why? Well, I think what was going on was I was engaged with the frequency of a kind of tension and a sort of like juggliness. There was kind of a buzz to it, like, well, how do I flip this over? And I want to get this thing cooking, and I'm also cooking the rice over here, and the whole thing feels kind of crammed, and that's what my body was resonating with. So the thinking that would have resulted in everything's fine, like that kind of thinking comes from an energy in the body. But if I'm busy tuning my body's radio to a different station, then I'm going to tend to pick up things on that station, playing a different genre of music, so to speak. And that's what I found. And I'm not trying to make a magical claim here. I mean, I think I do mean something magical, but the magical thing I mean is very mechanical. It's very understandable. It's not... it doesn't require there to be an extra force. It isn't like there is a thing vibrating that is separate from the physical world. Maybe there is. There almost certainly is. The ontology gets complicated here. But I'm not trying to assert some sort of magical paradigm. I'm more pointing out that my lived experience, I'm sharing that my lived experience keeps finding very systematically that the way that things play out has more to do with what station I'm tuning my body radio to than it does with what actions I take. It's not that the actions don't matter, but that the actions I find myself noticing and choosing come from the frequency. It sort of powers the thoughts, like a steam engine can, like steam in a steam engine powers the engine. The engine is ready, but then you shoot steam into it, and then the things start turning. Right? I get the impression that the mind certainly seems to work that way. Turn that off. Yeah, the mind certainly seems to work that way. My mind does. My mind sort of frames what actions I notice and how I choose to engage with things. And there's this sneaky bit of something like I knew this was going to create a splatter with the sausage patty. I knew, but I didn't pay attention to the fact that I knew. And it has some of the same flavor as when I'm in an argument with somebody. This hasn't happened in ages, as I think about it. But there's actually, let me rather than using my standard example, let me use a lived one. I sometimes get this experience of when I'm sharing something with someone, when I'm in a conversation with someone and an idea comes to mind, I then get obsessed with conveying the idea. And there's this little glimmer of an intuition that the other person isn't really into what I'm saying. This isn't relevant for our connection. So maybe it would be better for me to pause and check in with them. Like that's a clear intuition I can have. And then I'll sometimes just, whatever, but if I don't pay attention to that, I can finish saying my piece. Why? Well, if I ask that question, I won't finish. So let me ignore that question and finish saying my piece. In terms of Ian McGilchrist's way of talking about how our left and right hemispheres of the brain, the way that we normally talk about them as a culture, is completely borked. But there is a relevant difference between them. I think his work is marvelous. It was beautifully clarifying. In his way of describing it, I want to finish saying this. That's totally the left hemisphere sort of running ahead. So there's that kind of quality when flipping over the patty of, well, if I just ignore it, I can do my flip, and then I can sort of lean into the splatter, and then I get to feel frustrated with the situation and sort of victimized by the splatter and the whole situation. Like there's this whole engine that just loves to run. And it's running on the energy. In this case, I mean it metaphorically, like physics energy. It's running on the fuel that comes from the fact that my body, I was tuning my body to that frequency. So How widespread is that? Like, I notice things like when I'm walking down the street and I tune into the frequency of gratitude. Here I am experiencing this. Hmm. Right? And I feel the pleasure in my body. I see these trees, and I was just out going for a walk to look at some Christmas lights, just to see what people have done. And just admiring it and noticing like some of them are so terribly gaudy, and it's just fascinating. It's delightful. Some of them are very elegantly put together, this very graceful mix. Um, and just looking at that and noticing when I'm tuning into that, I find it really easy to find things that are beautiful and things to be grateful for. And I've been practicing that one in particular. It was one of the big lessons that came through for me in my work in Mexico. Really noticing how enormous and enormously precious this gift is of existing, of being alive, and getting to experience this. It's really precious. So tuning into that, like I don't have to pay attention to that, but if I do, I really enjoy my life better. And then I find things dropping into my lap. Things like when going out for a walk, there like twice as many houses were lit up, and a lot of them had really lovely setups. Twice as many houses as when I went out a couple of nights ago. Um, and like we can dismiss it, like sure, yeah, well, I mean, we're getting closer to Christmas, some people are putting up lights, there you go, and you were feeling good, so you notice things that were matched that. Great, so we've explained it, we've successfully dismissed it away. um, and I'm not trying to assert something here about the law of attraction. I'm not trying to assert. I think that this is okay. So I'm feeling a little subconscious because I'm anticipating. So I'm just going to speak this out loud while I process this because I notice that this knot keeps coming up and I want to untie it right now. I keep noticing this discomfort that is about me trying to describe the structure of experience as I encounter it, and noticing ways that I'm anticipating other people might experience this as me making an assertion that will cause a perspective of me that my sense of self finds uncomfortable. I don't want to be seen as a mystical woo head person. Um, I also don't want to be seen as a diehard materialist. Like both of those are uncomfortable to me. Um, the former considerably more when I imagine people judging me that way. Um, and so I'm wanting to acknowledge that and notice that energy, and I don't want to come from that energy anymore. I don't want to be concerned with that. So I'll invite you to notice that I'm not talking about a belief system. Um, okay, so that said, so there's this. So I'm talking. So I decided to title this video "Resonance." There's actually a place I was wondering if I might go. I don't want to keep going very much longer with this particular video. But I think there's something really important in practice. Let me rephrase that. I'm going to shift the energies. So what I was about to do was assert something that was in general, and I'm trying to be careful with that. Sorry. These happen so fast. Like the mind is so in the habit of grabbing energies and pulling them up and then stimulating fear and stimulating shame. And it's just so fast. And actually anchoring in what I want to do. It's really beautiful to do that. And then the mind runs off and like, oh, it's like a puppy. It's like, oh, we need to train the puppy. um, I notice that all of the really beautiful and good things that come to me, and all the bad ones really, but what I've noticed systematically in terms of creating the life that I want, all of the movement forward that I've been able to notice and experience seems to come through choosing the frequency, choosing the radio station that I want to tune into, and letting that ring in my body. Staying at that level. If I follow the mind, first off, where's the power coming from? Why do I follow the mind? For me, most of the time, it's fear. That's not necessarily a station I want to stay tuned to. And then those programs of mind, they're like pre-written programs. Their job, I mean, they have all kinds of jobs, but one of the jobs is to stimulate the body with images and ideas that create an experience and an anticipation set for me, which fuels something about it fuels which thoughts are more likely. And the thoughts, this is where we get into some interesting quirks of how evolution, like the actual law of evolution, plays a role in this whole process. Oh, hey, Daniel. Um, I'll give a shot at answering that question in just a bit. I'm going to finish this arc. So if I'm following the mind, then the mind is basically, well, so I didn't go on the evolutionary thing. The thought patterns that are likely to survive are the ones that are good at surviving. So the ones that are likely to stimulate power sources that reinforce themselves. This is a huge chunk of how memes work. They're good at fueling themselves for the most part. The ones that are effective, the ones that spread well, or at least the ones that live within a mind really well. So if I'm following my mind, I just keep recreating the same experience. I might change setting, but then I create the same flavor within that new setting. But if I tune my body to what I'm choosing to experience, that changes what thoughts I'm inclined to think. That seems like it moves things forward so much better. And then it's possible to, how to say that? People have frequencies too, the ones that they're tuning into, and there's also something like an amalgam flavor of somebody. When we talk about somebody having a vibe, I think we're talking about the same thing. At least I am. Um, when you get a sense of a person, um, Eugene Gendlin refers to this as the felt sense. When you have a felt sense of a person, at least in term this habit of language. Um, when I read what that's about, when I listen to this stuff about felt sense, this is how I interpret it. It has to do with this body level attunement. So by working at the level of paying attention to the radio, I'm able to feel what's going on with others a lot better too. And then I can do things that are in sync with them. Or notice I really don't want to be in sync, and that no amount of mental babble is going to change that. So I find that enormously fulfilling, and pragmatically, and in many ways coincidentally, very powerful for creating the kind of life that I want. It remains to be seen how vast that power is. But I notice that everything I've done that works, that I can recall, fits very well into this experience for me. Okay, so Daniel, you're asking what chooses the station, Bright Desire? So good question. What chooses the station? I want to say I do, for me. But who am I? It seems like a really great question. I'm feeling into it. I'm trying to get a sense of how it is that I do this. I want to say something like, I'm gonna, acting from the breath. I think, I think that's a result, but I don't think that's the cause. At least what I'm noticing when I pay attention to this. Um, what I notice is something like when my mind is still, I'm still experiencing, I'm still here, I still have opinions. If I've had enough alcohol that my mind does not work, like if I've been in these states where I've had enough alcohol that I'm sort of amazed that I can put sentences together. And I'll do something like intend to say something, and words will come out of my mouth, and I'll watch in absolute befuddlement as the sentences come out with correct grammar saying what I was trying to say, because it doesn't feel like I have any ability to do that. Right. So there's in those states, it's obvious that I, whoever I am, don't really have a clear relationship to my mind in those moments. At least like by that I mean something like the cognition engine, the experiential cognition engine. There's there's something weird has happened there. But somehow I'm still experiencing being drunk. Who's experiencing being drunk? Okay? I've um, I've had very strange experiences doing breath work or strange experiences in dreams where like my consciousness is significantly altered and um, I I feel like I'm not striking at the core. How do I strike at the core here? There's a feeling when I'm thirsty where I can reflect on how I could go up and get a cup of water. Actually, here's a more vivid lived example for me. Sometimes in the evenings, I'll get really tired. And I'll be sitting there looking at the computer with this sense of, if only I could get up and go change my clothes and go to the bathroom, and then I can go to bed. And it's a wonderful thought, like the thought of going to bed. But there's this activation barrier, activation energy barrier. I somehow would have to do that, and that doing is exhausting. And there's a place from which all that thinking becomes moot. It may feed into something, but there's a point where I choose to move the body. That choice feels like the same one I use to decide what frequency I'm tuning into. Where am I placing my attention? And so you're saying, then the answer is just the core and not the structure built around it. Yeah, if that makes sense to you, yes, I would say the core. The is at the center. Whatever that means. I don't claim to really understand what it means in some sort of, like, I don't have a clear model of this. I have a lot of pieces of something that looks kind of like a model, but the models happen in cognition, and I am using cognition. So the models feel like a secondary thing. It's sort of like I'm trying to ask my computer to tell me who I am, which is a little bit weird because here I am asking my computer to tell me. um, and it says, you likely have not read the post that that references then. Nope, I am completely unaware of there being a post that references the core and not the structure built around it. That is true. Um, I guess I want to wrap up in a moment here. Um, the direction that I was originally imagining that this would go, um, and I suspect I'll go to this in the future. This has become such a big feature of my life. It's really curious. Um, there's I think I understand a lot better what Carl Jung, I now understand now much better what Carl Jung was talking about when he was referring to archetypes. Um, there's there's something I experience as resonances that aren't just me, and they're not just I think they're in the world, but they're like facts about the world, like radio stations I can tune into. And I bet that these are stations that everyone has access to. I'm sure there are exceptions, but the exceptions would be incredibly notable because they're sort of the exceptions that prove the rule. Um, it's a little bit tricky to give fast examples because it takes the body a little bit of time, in my experience, to intentionally shift into a channel. And then, um, like there's this like paying attention to something like, and I imagine I'll get more into this in the future, paying attention to, for instance, the frequency of pleasure and delight, like the ecstasy of existence, right? The way in which there's something delicious about taking a breath, right? And there's, like, I'm looking over here at this spread of indoor plants. I'll just give a quick like spread of indoor plants, and there's this experience for me of like looking over at that and having a feeling of, oh, that's lovely, and it's very easy for my mind to sort of skip over it, but that's the mind. That's the mind following some other frequency, but I can tune a little more closely into lovely. Right, so experiencing the caress of beauty and elegance and softness and pleasure and delight. There's a way where by tuning into that, I can feel how it actually suffuses all of consciousness, and it's in everything. And by paying attention to it, it's like the volume knob gets turned up a little bit. Like I can see how that resonance is everywhere. Um, that resonance, that particular frequency, uh, I don't know how historical this is, but metaphorically, I think of that as the goddess Venus or Aphrodite. Um, there's a way where that frequency as that archetype, and it sort of doesn't matter which mythos you want to pull from in order to name this, as far as I can tell. Um, there's something profound about the fact that it's a resonance type that when I tune into it and then I speak to it, it's something that I observe seems to become easier for other people to pick up on in a pretty systematic way. Whereas when I zoom in on something like the resonance of my I forget the Japanese term for this, but there's a certain kind of experience that I had in Aikido that was about a sort of ritualized exercise. And there's a kind of movement to it that felt very fulfilling. And there's a way where I could embody that frequency, and I think I could convey it. But I don't expect it to echo, for lack of a better term. I don't expect it to echo through bodies the same way that the Venusian frequency does. Right? And Eric S. Raymond talks about this kind of stuff when in his article "Dancing with the Gods." Um, is something incredibly fascinating about there being certain frequencies that lots and lots of people carry in their subconscious minds, just about everybody. And because of that, when you tune to it, you're sort of resonating with that in a lot of people. That's the strategic way of describing it. Um, my experience is more like the world is made of these things. The world is made of archetypes. There's something really beautiful about learning how to resonate with those. Um, so I imagine I will go into that a bit more later. Um, it's a it's to me a very artistic exploration. It's very pretty, um, and I've noticed that it helps me to anchor some of my own inner work. Um, but I can tell that I'm going a bit more into it than I really want to just now. I want to hold that. I want to hold that meta frequency with integrity. And right now I'm noticing that I'm getting kind of depleted. So I'm going to wrap this up. Um, thank you for listening. Thanks for jumping on, Daniel, and interacting. And yeah, hopefully I can do tomorrow's a little bit earlier. Cool. Good night.